The argument of the book is essentially that the conditions of the war almost precluded a British victory. But historians never believe anything is inevitable. They're very aware of the role of chance and other contingencies that may change the outcome at any point in history. The war could have been lost by the Americans, and leadership plays a key role in their victory. It's very difficult to imagine anyone being as effective as Washington, and certainly not the alternatives who were considered during the war. John Hancock in Boston was seriously mooted in Massachusetts as an alternative commander-in-chief, and yet in many ways the man seems almost a poseur. He commanded during an operation in Newport very ineffectively. Horatio Gates was considered as a possible alternative to Washington after his great victory at Saratoga. But Gates himself was later defeated at Camden and infamously fled a couple of hundred miles from the battlefield immediately afterwards. Charles Lee was also considered as an alternative to Washington, but Lee had suggested really fighting a guerrilla warfare against the British. This typically would lead to anarchy. Washington was thinking as much of the country that would emerge after the war as merely defeating the British. He was very keen that America be considered a civilized nation in relation to Europe. He's sometimes been accused himself of being too conventional, but it was very important to him that they beat the British at their own game. Therefore, the great victories of the war were conventional type European battles, Saratoga and Yorktown, or even the Battle of Cowpens. These were the key turning points in which the tactics were very much those used by the British themselves. Indeed, it's remarkable to read British accounts at the end of the war in which they pay testimony to Washington and his army. They argue that they were as good as the British troops themselves, that they achieved a miracle by beginning as an unarmed citizenry and becoming so effective in such a relatively short amount of time. Interestingly, the British press criticised their own leaders and especially their own government, but they never criticised George Washington. He was admired in Britain. There is a statue of him today in Trafalgar Square next to Britain's greatest hero of all time, Admiral Lord Nelson. The British Navy fired a full gun salute and lowered their flags when they heard about Washington's death.